Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Octane Origins, where today we dive into the story of one of the most ambitious and disruptive superbikes of the modern era, the Ducati 1199 Panigale. When Ducati unveiled this machine in 2011 for the 2012 model year, it wasn't just another iteration in their long line of fast twins. It was a complete rethinking of what a superbike could be. The Panigale threw out decades of tradition, redefined Ducati's engineering DNA, and set new benchmarks that rippled through the industry. But what really makes the 1199 Panigale fascinating isn't just its staggering horsepower numbers or its futuristic looks, it's the drama behind its creation, the risks Ducati took by breaking with sacred design choices, and the legacy it left behind as both a triumph and a controversy. Over the next hour, we're going to unpack the full story in depth. We'll explore how Ducati found itself at a crossroads in the late 2000s, when the superbike market was being reshaped by electronic aids, stricter regulations, and increasingly aggressive competition from Japan and Europe. We'll then look closely at how the engineers in Bologna decided to gamble everything on the Panigale, crafting the Super Quattro engine, introducing electronics that would redefine the rider's relationship with the machine, and pushing the limits of design in ways that turned heads and raised eyebrows. And finally, we'll examine the aftermath, the cultural and performance impact of this Italian rocket, how it divided riders between those who saw it as the pinnacle of Ducati innovation, those who mourned the loss of tradition, and how it permanently altered the trajectory of superbike development across the industry. Whether you're someone who has ridden a Panigale, admired it from afar, or just loves the high-stakes drama of bold engineering decisions, this is a story worth sitting with, because at its heart, the 1199 Panigale wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a declaration. A statement that Ducati would no longer be defined by its past alone, but by how far it was willing to leap into the future. So settle in, because the tale of the Ducati 1199 Panigale is one of ambition, risk, and legacy. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why this bike has earned its reputation as the Italian rocket that redefined superbikes. Ducati's decision to reinvent itself with the 1199 Panigale did not emerge in a vacuum. It came after years of pressure from an industry where horsepower, weight savings, and electronic control systems were becoming the new battleground. Riders had become accustomed to bikes that offered blistering performance, yet also delivered confidence through traction control, ride modes, and chassis innovations. And Ducati knew that the old trellis frame and incremental updates wouldn't be enough to keep pace. The Panigale was born from necessity as much as vision, a project intended to demonstrate that Ducati could stand shoulder to shoulder with Yamaha, Kawasaki, and BMW at the bleeding edge of technology. The stakes were high because tampering with tradition in a company so deeply tied to heritage was always risky, but Ducati framed it as evolution with intent. What followed was a bold, sometimes polarizing path into the future. Micro story. In the late 2000s, Ducati's superbike line was anchored by the 1198, a capable machine, but one that felt increasingly analog compared to rivals boasting sophisticated electronics. Engineers knew they couldn't just stretch the old formula, they needed a revolution. Meetings in Bologna turned into debates about whether to discard the trellis frame, a symbol of Ducati's identity for decades. The decision to walk away from it was agonizing, but ultimately, they knew it was the only way forward. This was more than swapping metal for innovation. It was rewriting the rules of what made a Ducati superbike a Ducati. Context digest. By the time the Panigale was in development, BMW had already shaken the market with the S1000RR, a machine that combined towering power with electronics that gave riders both safety and aggression. The bar was suddenly much higher, and Ducati was faced with a challenge: how to meet and exceed expectations without losing the charisma that kept fans loyal. In many ways, the Panigale project was as much about brand survival as it was about performance numbers. Microstory. Inside Ducati's R&D center, the engineers conceived the Super Quattro engine, a name that literally meant over square, reflecting its extreme bore-to-stroke ratio. This design pushed displacement and rev limits further than any Ducati twin before, delivering nearly 200 horsepower while retaining that signature V-twin character. But creating this engine wasn't just about speed, it was about proving that Ducati could bend the laws of physics and packaging, squeezing monumental power from a configuration some believed had reached its ceiling. The risks were real. Heat, management, vibration, and reliability all had to be balanced against the allure of record-setting figures. Reflection bridge. What made the Panigale so daring was that Ducati was not simply trying to keep up. It was trying to leap ahead by fusing identity with innovation in a way no other brand dared attempt. Micro story. Beyond the motor, Ducati revolutionized its chassis approach with the monocoque frame, where the engine itself served as a stressed member. This decision removed the traditional lattice of steel tubing that had visually defined Ducati for generations, replacing it with a compact aluminum structure that doubled as the airbox. It was brilliant in theory, saving weight and centralizing mass, but it also sparked controversy. For purists, the trellis frame was sacred. For engineers, it was outdated. The Panigale stood at the crossroads of heritage and performance, sparking arguments that continue even today. Context digest. By discarding so many traditions at once, Ducati positioned the 1199 Panigale as a statement of intent, not just a product. It had to win fans over not only on track but also in the showroom, where buyers craved not just performance figures, but also the sense of connection to Ducati's legacy. This tension shaped the Panigale's story from its first reveal, because people weren't simply asking, is it fast, and they were asking, is it still a Ducati? Micro story. In 2011, the world first saw the 1199 Panigale under the lights of the Milan Motorcycle Show. Its bodywork was impossibly sleek, its proportions futuristic, and its specifications jaw-dropping. Ducati had promised a revolution, and on paper it delivered. But beneath the applause was nervous energy. If the bike's performance matched its presentation, Ducati would be hailed as visionary. If it faltered, critics would brand it a betrayal of the brand's essence. This launch wasn't just a reveal. It was the moment Ducati threw down a gauntlet to the entire Superbike world. Reflection bridge. What followed the dramatic launch was a test of reality. Would the Panigale's radical choices translate into dominance on the road and track, or had Ducati gambled too much on reinvention? Context digest. The reception among journalists and fans was electric yet conflicted. Enthusiasts marveled at the numbers: 195 horsepower, less than 420 pounds dry weight, electronics that read like a science experiment. At the same time, skeptics muttered about reliability, heat issues, and whether this was progress or hubris. Ducati had positioned the 1199 Panigale as a turning point, and the next chapters would prove whether it stood as revolution or as overreach. This tension would define its story, and only performance could provide the answer. The Panigales. First rides and track outings would determine everything, shaping how Ducati's boldest gamble would be judged in the years to come. And that's where we turn next. When the 1199 Panigale finally made its way into the hands of riders and testers, the reactions were as extreme as the machine itself. Ducati had delivered a bike that was blindingly fast, feather-light, and packed with more electronics than most riders had ever experienced. Yet with that brilliance came challenges, as the very traits that made it a marvel also made it demanding and at times unforgiving. The Panigale wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was about testing limits, both of the machine and of the rider. Microstory. Early track reviews revealed the Panigale's split personality. On one hand, its acceleration was intoxicating, blasting out of corners with ferocity that rivaled anything on the market. On the other, the absence of the trellis frame and the aggressive chassis geometry made it feel razor-sharp, sometimes too sharp for less experienced hands. Riders reported that it required intense focus to extract its potential, rewarding skill but punishing hesitation. Ducati had built a weapon, but it demanded discipline. Context digest. This duality reflected the bike's role in world superbike racing, where rules favored twins, but demanded immense engineering compromises. Ducati saw the Panigale as its ticket to reclaim dominance, but adapting the road-going machine for racing highlighted weaknesses as much as strengths. Heat, stability, and the difficulty of setup became recurring themes, showing that brilliance on paper wasn't the same as consistency on the grid. Microstory. At Imola and other iconic circuits, the Panigale showed flashes of greatness. It had straight-line speed that startled rivals, and in skilled hands it could carve times that matched or beat the competition. Yet inconsistency plagued results. Some weekends looked like vindication for Ducati's gamble. Others left fans wondering whether the radical design had sacrificed balance for spectacle. The story of the Panigale on track was one of peaks and valleys, a roller coaster that mirrored its experimental engineering, reflection bridge. Ducati's challenge wasn't just about performance numbers, it was about translating groundbreaking ideas into confidence for riders at every level, from professionals to weekend enthusiasts. Microstory. Owners who bought the Panigale for the street discovered that its race-bred DNA came with trade-offs. The bike ran hot, often uncomfortably so in traffic, and its aggressive ergonomics made it happiest at speeds far above what most public roads allowed. Yet those same traits created an aura of exclusivity. To ride the Panigale was to shoulder the intensity of a race machine in everyday life, a badge of honor for some and a frustration for others. It wasn't a commuter, it was a statement. Context digest. Ducati's marketing leaned into this duality, portraying the Panigale as a machine for those who craved the purest expression of speed and control. It was not for everyone, and that was part of its allure. This selective appeal kept the Panigale in demand, even as word spread about its demanding nature, proving that identity sometimes mattered more than universal accessibility. Microstory. Engineers back in Bologna listened to the mixed feedback and recognized the need to refine the formula. The Panigale's electronics suite was updated, firmware tweaks improved throttle response, and suspension settings evolved. These changes didn't erase the raw edge, but they softened it enough to widen the circle of riders who could enjoy the bike without feeling overwhelmed. Each adjustment was a balancing act between taming the beast and preserving its wild spirit. Reflection bridge. What makes the Panigale story compelling is how Ducati leaned into its contradictions, embracing both the criticism and the praise as part of its mystique. Microstory. By the mid-2010s, the Panigale had become more than just a model. It was the foundation of an entire family. The R versions pushed racing credentials, the S versions emphasized technology, and limited editions honored heritage. Each variation was a thread in the larger tapestry, showing how Ducati turned one radical idea into a flexible platform. The Panigale wasn't just surviving. It was spawning a dynasty that reinforced Ducati's global identity. Context digest. The broader Superbike world was forced to respond. Japanese manufacturers doubled down on electronics, BMW refined its S1000RR into sharper form, and Aprilia leaned on its RS V4 to demonstrate that V4s might be the future. Ducati's twin-powered gamble had rattled cages, and the industry was suddenly recalibrating to keep up. In that sense, the Panigale had already succeeded, because influence is a kind of victory even when trophies are scarce. Microstory. Behind the scenes, Ducati engineers began contemplating the next leap. Could the future lie not in the twin, but in something entirely new, like a V4 Superbike? The Panigale served as both proof and provocation. It showed that Ducati could risk everything and still emerge influential, but it also hinted at the limits of the twin-cylinder format at extreme outputs. The Panigale was both the climax of one era and the spark of another. The impact of the Panigale was no longer limited to lap times or sales numbers. It was reshaping Ducati's philosophy, and that transformation is where the final stage of the story unfolds. The legacy of the Ducati 1199 Panigale is not measured solely in horsepower or trophies, but in the way it permanently shifted Ducati's trajectory and the superbike world around it. By daring to abandon traditions and embrace radical engineering, Ducati set a precedent that boldness could be just as important as refinement. The Panigale became a mirror of Ducati's identity, equal parts artistry, audacity, and ambition, and its influence continues to ripple years after its launch. Microstory. For Ducati loyalists, the Panigale was a moment of reckoning. Some riders embraced it wholeheartedly, celebrating its futuristic design and race-bred character. Others held tight to memories of the trellis frame and air-cooled twins, arguing that something essential had been lost. This tension did not weaken Ducati. It made the brand's narrative richer, creating space for both nostalgia and innovation to coexist. The Panigale wasn't just a machine. It was a cultural touchstone that sparked conversations about what it means to be a Ducati rider. Context digest. Around the world, motorcycle culture was changing. Younger riders were entering a market defined by technology and digital connection, while older enthusiasts cherished mechanical purity. The Panigale straddled both worlds, a machine that embodied the leap into the digital era while still carrying the raw charisma of a twin-cylinder engine. In doing so, it helped Ducati capture attention across generations, proving that reinvention could keep a legacy alive. Micro story. The 1199 Panigale's role in shaping Ducati's future became clear when the company introduced the V4 Panigale years later. That transition was bold, moving away from the twin-cylinder format that had defined the brand for decades. Yet without the groundwork laid by the 1199, the leap to a V4 would have been unthinkable. The Panigale taught Ducati's engineers, marketers, and fans that evolution sometimes requires rupture, that to move forward, you must be willing to let go of certain anchors. Reflection bridge. What began as a daring experiment with the 1199 ultimately unlocked the creative freedom that would shape Ducati's modern Superbike dynasty. Micro story. In racing, the Panigale may not have dominated in the way earlier Ducatis did, but its spirit lived on in every adjustment, refinement, and successor. Each race weekend became a laboratory, testing not just the machine but the philosophy behind it. Though results were mixed, the persistence of Ducati in pushing the concept validated the importance of risk in motorsport. The Panigale's presence alone forced competitors to innovate, keeping the Superbike arms race alive and fierce. Context digest. Beyond the racetrack, the Panigale also influenced the way motorcycles were perceived in popular culture. Its dramatic silhouette, piercing LED eyes, and aggressive lines became iconic in films, advertisements, and social media. The Panigale was more than a motorcycle. It was an aspirational symbol, an Italian rocket that communicated power and elegance in equal measure. In that sense, it extended Ducati's reach far beyond enthusiasts, capturing the imagination of the broader public. Micro story. For riders who owned one, the Panigale became a story in itself. Every ride was a reminder that this was not a casual machine, but a commitment. It asked for skill, patience, and respect, and in return, it delivered moments of exhilaration that bordered on transcendence. These personal stories, often told with pride and a touch of awe, ensured that the Panigale's reputation was carried not just by the press or the track, but by the lived experiences of its owners. Reflection bridge. By the time the Panigale had passed its prime production years, it was clear that Ducati had achieved more than building a fast motorcycle. It had built a legend that challenged the boundaries of tradition and progress. Context digest. The enduring lesson of the Panigale is that courage in design and engineering can reshape an entire industry. Other manufacturers learned from Ducati's example, some borrowing ideas, others taking alternate paths, but all recognizing that the bar had been raised. The Superbike category became sharper, faster, and more electronically advanced because the Panigale demanded it. That is perhaps its greatest triumph. Not just what it was, but what it forced everyone else to become. In the end, the Ducati 1199 Panigale stands as a defining chapter in the story of motorcycling. It was not perfect, nor was it universally loved, but it was unforgettable. It redefined superbikes by proving that innovation requires risk, that tradition can evolve without disappearing, and that motorcycles are as much about the soul they inspire as the speed they deliver. Ducati's Italian rocket did not just change the company, it changed the conversation about what a superbike could be, and its echo continues to shape the machines we see today. As we step back from the details, the bigger picture of the Ducati 1199 Panigale becomes clear. This was never just a motorcycle built to top spec sheets. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that Ducati was willing to abandon its most cherished traditions to chase the future. In doing so, the Panigale proved that innovation is not clean or comfortable. It is messy, controversial, and often polarizing. Yet those very qualities are what carve lasting legends into the history of motorcycling. The Panigale's story is one of ambition met with both triumphs and challenges, where engineering brilliance collided with real-world limitations, and where cultural impact sometimes outweighed track results. For Ducati, it was the catalyst that enabled a leap into the V4 era, a transition that might never have been possible without first daring to break the mold with the 1199. For the industry, it raised expectations, forcing competitors to elevate their own game and ushering in a new generation of superbikes defined by electronics, power, and design bravado. And for riders, it offered a reminder that some machines are not built to be easy or universally accessible. They are built to inspire awe, to test skill, and to ignite passion. That is why the 1199 Panigale endures in memory, not because it was flawless, but because it dared to be uncompromisingly different. It asked more from those who rode it and gave back an experience unlike any other. So when we call it the Italian rocket that redefined superbikes, it's not just about speed. It's about the courage to redefine what was possible. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.